अस्सलाम वालेकुम और खुश आमदेद। मैं आपसे बहुत माज़रत करती हूँ, मुझे ये तकरीर जो है वो उर्दू में देनी थी, मगर मैं रहती अमेरिका में हूँ। पिछले 30 साल से मैं अंग्रेज़ी बोल रही हूँ लोगों के सामने। तो मेरा आपसे वादा ये है कि 3 साल में या 2 साल में आप मोहलत दें, अगली तकरीर मेरी उर्दू में होगी। ये वाली अंग्रेज़ी में होगी, इधर-उधर थोड़ी-सी उर्दू बोल दूँ तो ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगी, बट होना उर्दू में चाहिए थी। लिखी मैंने अंग्रेजी में है, 2 दिन थे मेरे पास। तर्जुमा मैंने किसी और से करवा लिया। वो बहुत मज़े का तर्जुमा इस तरह से था कि जो मतलब इट वाज अ काइंड ऑफ इमरजेंसी ट्रांसलेशन व्हिच आई काइंड ऑफ लाइक्ड बिकॉज़ आई आल्सो वर्क ऑन ट्रांसलेशन एज अ कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर प्रोफेसर। और उन जो साहब थे उन्होंने सारे जेंडर प्रोनाउंस उसमें मर्दाने कर दिए। मेरे ख्याल से वो सोच नहीं सके कि कोई खातून भी इस किस्म की बातें कर सकती हैं। But that's been happening to me all my life. नहीं आपको मालूम था? नहीं मैं आप भी बैठे हैं, मैं मजाक कर रही थी, वैसे कोई बात नहीं। But I was flattered, I think. I'm not sure, but it's been happening to me all my life, so why not now? Anyway, but I actually got a kick out of it. Thank you very much for being here. I am going to start with a bunch of thank yous. I'm very clumsy, तो अपने आप को संभालना मुश्किल है, मगर अब मिडिल एज में ऐनक को और कागज को और माइक को संभालना बहुत मुश्किल है। तो अजीब अजीब किस्म की आवाजें आए और धमाके हों, तो I apologize in advance. I'm very happy to be here today and to have been given this extraordinary opportunity to work with them by Yasser and the Climate Action Center, Karachi. So first of all, I want to thank Yasser, both for the opportunity and for the extraordinary and inspiring work he has enabled at the center. I also want to thank the exceptional team at CAC that has proved an inspiration. Warda Mumtaz, Javeria Fez, Myra Mumtaz, Kinza Naseem, Hussain Rizvi, Muhammad Faiz, Naveed Waghani. Did I get the name right? The last one? Okay. Their energy, laughter, intelligence, and initiative rejuvenates me every time I walk into the center. And since I'm an escapee from Trump's America, rejuvenation is much in need. Afaq Bhatti is an old comrade. He also works at the Climate Action Center. Zahi Naqvi has handled my logistics. Ali Sher and Manavvar Rahimun accommodate me every day because I have all kinds of dietary restrictions. Thanks also to the numerous interns. I respect Yasser tremendously for having created one of the least hierarchical spaces I have seen anywhere in the world. In Pakistan, which is, whether we like it or not, and the fact that I'm speaking English the way I am is part of this, so I apologize again, one of the most hierarchical societies and class-bound societies I have encountered, and I've traveled a lot, this is truly exceptional and surprising. I also want to thank Yasser for modeling what I hope will continue to be an example of institutional cohort building. But my greatest thanks from the team must go to Warda, who has been in charge of this project for at least the last year, and whose round-eyed wonder at my absurdities and intellectual excesses has given me quite a bit of glee as I've sat in New York, Italy, Siena, and London, and a lot of humbling gratification. Thank you. My other thanks must go to my other partner in this endeavor, Nilofer Farooq, who is another model for me of calm and collected institution building. Her generosity has been extraordinary, as has her intellectual spark. Her invitations to engage have been both humbling and enabling, and have made me even happier to spend work and not just holiday time in this vast, rambling, improbable city that I have loved so much all my life. And last, but not at all least, my gratitude to NAPA for collaborating with us on this event. Finally, a thank you to Rutgers Global and Vice President Rick Garfunkel for their tremendous support. Thank you all. Imagining life would not be possible without your combined energies, and I look forward to what we will do together in the years to come. Thank you also to the audience for your presence, or Shukriya Samain, Napa hai yahan pe. I hope that you join in the conversation and thinking and share your thoughts in the coming 2 days, but also in the coming months and years. We're all in the climate crisis together, and we need to find a way to fight it together. I repeat the word together. It's especially important to repeat it in this country and in this city, where working together is often very, very difficult, especially in the elite structures, in the elite sites where many of us actually live and function. The normal structures of competition and elite competition will not work given the situation we're in. साथ करेंगे तो शायद में बच जाएं, नहीं करेंगे तो आपको पता है हालात क्या हैं, डूबेंगे literally. और कहत के हालात आप देख रहे हैं कि, we've got drought, we've got famine. I'll talk about it in a minute. But the fight is not merely scientific or legal or political. As many writers and thinkers recognize more and more, we have to reimagine how we live in the world, and we have to rethink our relationship with the living world. In fact, and what that means is that we have to think of the world as a living organism. In the last 400 years, under European colonialism, हम ये सब भूल चुके हैं. Fisher folk वाले लोग बैठे हुए हैं यहाँ पे, and I'm very proud and grateful कि आप लोग आए हैं आज. आप याद दिलाते हैं हमें रोज कि क्या क्या चीजें हैं जो गायब हो चुकी हैं यहीं से, कराची कोस्ट लाइन से, और क्या क्या चीजें हैं जो 30 साल पहले हो सकती थी इस शहर में और इस समंदर के किनारे पे, और अब नहीं हो सकती हैं. आपसे मैंने सीखा है, आइंदा भी सीखेंगे इंशाल्लाह. And yet, we need more people to care and be invested. We need all the artistic, scholarly, and intellectual resources we can muster. We need the humanities. We need artists. We need performers. We need scholars. We need you. We need each other. There is no escape from the planet. There's nowhere to go. As climatologists have argued, simply insisting on the scientific facts is not enough. To quote Ursula Heiser and others, the science cannot be disconnected from the, quote, political, social, cultural, affective, and rhetorical forms that the climate problem takes in different communities. I do also want to say that although I'm giving this talk in English, even though I try to lapse into Urdu whenever I can, ये पूरी talk जो है हमारी website पे उर्दू में भी होगी. इसका तर्जुमा हम लगा देंगे ऊपर, and we'll adapt for the gender. In other words, cultural, historical, and social frameworks are crucial to shaping our understanding. कहने का मकसद सिर्फ ये है कि आप जितनी भी साइंस की बात कर लें, अगर आप अपनी सोच नहीं बदलेंगे कि हमें यहाँ रहना कैसे है, तो कुछ नहीं बदलेगा. And we need to engage everyone across every sort of divide, class, caste, which we never talk about in this country, but which exists, race and gender, and across subjects, disciplines, institutions. Many are doing this work already, and we want to engage in mutually respectful collaboration when possible. And now, with Yasir's permission, I speak for the Climate Action Center when I say we. As an initiative, Imagining Life comes out of this understanding, and we can say thus that it is a substantial part of Climate Action Center's cultural wing. CAC works in a variety of sectors, but its commitment is to transformation of our attitudes and practices so that we can survive the climate crisis. But we do not want merely to survive. I repeat, we do not want merely to survive. Our commitment, and again, our means the Climate Action Center, is not merely to survival. It is instead a deep commitment to human thriving. We want all of us to thrive. It seems impossible these days. Dunya pagal ho gayi hai. This might sound stupidly optimistic, indeed utopian in this moment of global madness. These are spectacularly dark times for this planet. The billionaires might think of humans as disposable and want to make the planet itself disposable. Two, stealing all the resources and then running off to Mars. But we cannot all be Elon Musk. This planet is the only home we have. We better do something about it. And it is facing unprecedented challenges. The earth is heating up. Weather is unpredictable. Glaciers are melting. Drought is rampant. Entire cities and even countries are expected to drown. I have just come from Italy, where I spend 4 months a year every year. वहाँ पे आप यकीन करें कि इटली में इस वक्त इतने पाकिस्तानी immigrants हैं जो डंकियों पे जा रहे हैं, braving all kinds of risks. और वजीराबाद से जाते हैं, मंडी बहाउद्दीन से मैं बच्चों से मिली हूँ, KPK से जा रहे हैं. And it's because of your economic crisis, but it's also because of, all the other crises that are agricultural and climate related and so on. And we're not paying any attention to them. And you cannot imagine the journeys they're going through. I have spoken to so many of them. बच्चे हैं, 12-12 साल के बच्चे भाग रहे हैं और यहाँ से जाते हैं टर्की से, ईरान से चल के, अफगानिस्तान से चल के, ईरान, टर्की, Greece, Slovenia, Serbia, where they're shut up in jails, stripped of their clothes, put in icy conditions, and their remittances are now building towns in Punjab. And we're not talking about them. Last year, the Pakistani government, the Interior Ministry said we will not give them political representation, consular representation. And then that was reversed, and it only made it into the Urdu press. Right? When I called up from Italy, and I called up the Spanish ambassador, actually. I said, क्या कर रहे हो यार तुम लोग? कहते हैं भाई ये हो रहा है. स्पेन में पाकिस्तानी हैं, भरे हुए हैं. फ्रांस में हैं, अब कहाँ सब भाग के जा रहे हैं, मगर कहाँ तक जाएंगे और कहाँ? अभी तो यूरोप से आपको निकाला जा रहा है, अमेरिका में किसी, you're not welcome. There is no escape. So we better wake up. Anyway, so as I said, we're all in this together, right? So countries are disappearing and all that, right? Entire cities and even countries are expected to drown. Species are disappearing at an astonishing rate. It is only in their disappearance that we, as modern humans, are learning to understand the extent of our dependency of them. For instance, if the bees disappear, what's going to happen to us? There's going to be very little or no pollination. We have become used to wounding the world. Let me repeat that. We have become used to wounding the world. We forget that every time we drop a bomb, or a bomb is dropped, even if we think we personally don't drop it, we hurt the earth as well. We destroy animals who are not involved in our wars and have no say in our pseudo-democracies. We think being modern is always a good thing. And yet, in the modern era, the myth of progress and development has fed cultures of rampant extraction and consumption. Mountains collapse because we cannot stop building hideous structures. The entire mountains that are disappearing because developers are sort of emptying them out, and pointless overpasses and dams and canals, which we taught, and we learned how to do this from the colonials, which are stopping rivers, and then we show off about our technology while our people starve and this river dies. You'll be watching a movie about this soon. So now we have a word, Anthropocene, to describe the impact that humans have had and are having on the planet in this new era. What I'm saying is not news. It is not just my work. I am not fundamentally an environmental humanist, although I do some work on it. This is the work of others. Although many are still in denial, it is important, however, to say that there is a debate about whether we should say the problem is the Anthropocene or the Capitalocene, because that comes from capitalism, because of the effects of Western colonialism and its connection with capitalism. Now, however, we are all part of the culture of consumerism and extraction and rampant development that is destroying the earth and feeding the climate crisis. Development has too often meant the destruction of habitats and ecosystems. I wish it meant the destruction of ecosystems too, but it doesn't, unfortunately. Of the cultivation of one crop at the expense of other crops. Our habitats were destroyed by the colonialists and their faith in the industrial project. To take just one example, one might think of the way the British cultivated opium, destroying other crops, creating famines, and leading to wars, the Opium Wars famously in Asia. And having worshipped progress, we don't know how to stop. That too is part of the crisis we are facing. As these practices destroying age-old practices of living in communities and in peace with the habitat, right? And living with those communities, again, is what the fisher folk know very well how to, teaching us how to return to some of those practices, if only we would listen. So one question for us would mean that here, sitting in Karachi, Pakistan में हम बैठे हुए हैं, हमारे कुछ मसाइल बहुत लोकल हैं, तो उनका हम यहाँ से क्या कर सकते हैं और दूसरों को क्या सिखा सकते हैं? हमें बहुत आदत है कि जब कुछ होता है हम भाग जाते हैं अमेरिका, हम यूरोप जाते हैं, हमसे कहते हैं हमें सिखाइए आप, But they don't have the answers. They want to learn from us too. Our habitat is different. What's happening to our mangroves is happening here. What's going to happen? अगर सैलाब आएगा तो यहाँ आएगा. अमेरिका हमें कुछ नहीं देगा, यूरोप भी नहीं देगा कुछ, और हम भागेंगे यहाँ से लोग, और वो इंतजार में नहीं कर बैठे कि हमें वेलकम करें, right? So except for the ones again who've transferred the money, we need to actually find internal solutions. So we need to think about the world in geographical terms so that we need to stop conceding the superiority of Western knowledge and start producing knowledge here. We have to respect ourselves enough to learn to think and produce here without bending our knee to the rest of the world all the time. There are people elsewhere also who want to learn from us. Let's teach them. Given the situation and what's happening in the world, in Palestine and South Sudan and our own neighboring provinces of Balochistan and KPK, given the general moment of global madness, our commitment to human thriving at CAC, and human thriving is, by the way, Yasser's phrase in a conversation we had 2 years ago, might sound utopian and even stupidly optimistic. But there are moments in time, and I believe our climate crisis determined world has given us one such moment when what once seemed utopian and fantastical is merely a necessity of species survival. Right? And now I'm talking about हमारी species. बाकियों तो हमने जो किया है वो किया है, बहुत सारी गायब भी हो गई हैं, अगले हम जाएंगे. A while ago, giving a talk in the United States, which, as you know, is spinning out of control and self-destructing at warp speed, I said that a necrosis, which is a kind of cell death or tissue death, seems to be governing the political imagination. We seem obsessed with death, not just here, but in the West, especially in the West. Our political classes the world over have created death everywhere and seem unable to escape from it. The world even seems full of dead ideas, which is why we have to think even more about opening our imaginations to different ways of thinking and being. We have to be committed to life in the future and to the future of life. It is indeed our duty to the future and to the young who are inheriting our mess, but cannot also be burdened with our despair. My ideas have come out of recent interdisciplinary work I have organized in my capacity as the director of the Center for European Studies at Rutgers University. And it is also very much part of an academic book. And they are also very much part of an academic book I'm writing at the moment, and I'm hoping to finish in the next year. I suggested the title Imagining Life to this initiative because I believe what we need is a resistance to the obsession with the ruins and ruination in the Western imagination, which is just one face of the death obsession or the death cult. Whether we like it or not, the Western imagination has come to shape thought across the planet since the Europeans began to colonize it after Columbus arrived in the Americas after 1492. It is a tragedy, given my own education, because of the way that our educational structures are, our educational institutions are structured, that I had to hit my 40s before I realized that the Urdu word for colonialism was no abadiyat, and then I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been working on for the past 20 years. Anything's possible. I might actually learn other things. Here then is what I have to say against ruin. And this is my conclusion. Thinking about life transformed after an apocalyptic event is very much part of the Western imagination. It permeates literature and film and television, whether we like it or not. It is the imagination that circles the planet. आप सोचें, मूवी देखी, सब कुछ तबाह हो गया, आईफल टावर को उड़ा दिया, क्राइस्लर बिल्डिंग को उड़ा दिया, जो भी हैं बड़ी बड़ी बिल्डिंग्स, मैनहट्टन को उड़ा दिया, सब बड़े खुश हो गए. आई एम लेजेंड में वो विल स्मिथ जो हैं गोल्फ खेल रहे हैं यूएसएस डिस्ट्रॉयर पे, कोई दुनिया में नहीं है. प्लैनेट ऑफ द एप्स 40 साल पुरानी मूवी है, स्टैच्यू ऑफ लिबर्टी गिरी हुई हैं, उनके साथ चार्ल्टन हेस्टन चित पड़े हैं, राइट? उसके बाद एप्स आर रनिंग ओवर द अर्थ. दैट्स हाउ वी थिंक अबाउट द फ्यूचर, राइट? The same colonialism that has resulted in the structures of rampant extraction and development has also made destruction the norm. Bigger bombs, bigger destruction, the greater the explosion, the greater the applause. Shock and awe, and of course, many of you will recognize that phrase from the Iraq War. are mingled and we are impressed. And the more it happens, the harder it is to shock and awe us. And so the greater the scale of the destruction in the next film in storytelling. After all, it's hard to shock those who have become used to terrible destruction. When you have normalized horror, you have to make horror greater to horrify. I'm not, of course, talking about Malik Riaz's architectural fantasies, although those are quite horrifying too. At least as far as aesthetic horror goes, what's happening with development in the city is a sign of the developmentalist madness, and mountains are being disappeared and the Mallee River is being depleted in order to uphold this developmentalist fantasy. In any case, coming back to narrative and storytelling, in a great deal of narratives about pollution and the uninhabitability of the earth, the apocalyptic imagination, the imagination जिसमें हर चीज को तोड़ा जा रहा है, वो तस्वीर जिसमें दुनिया को बर्बाद किया जा रहा है और उसके बाद कुछ उसमें से कहीं एक पौधा निकलेगा. That imagination requires the end of the world, and it seems to reign supreme. This is perhaps most evident in science fiction that imagines a post-nuclear or some other catastrophic scenario. In order to scare us into thinking about the consequences of our actions, such books, stories, and films ask us to imagine a future after that terrible event. But we don't have that luxury anymore. Extinction is around the corner. So you can't flirt with apocalypse when apocalypse is staring you in the face. The idea is that we will be transformed by the disaster and learn to live better. Such stories have taught us a lot in the past, but that fear is not enough. It cannot be the ultimate galvanizer of our actions. The title of Imagining Life comes from the conviction, my conviction, a conviction that I'm very thrilled Yasser shares, that now that extinction seems so close, we cannot afford to imagine ruin and apocalypse as the only pathway to transformation, social or human. It's not enough to fear the effects of climate change. We need to cultivate new practices and commit to old ones. And again, I gesture to the fisher folk. They teach us some of the older practices which we don't even know about. बहुत सारी चीजें हमें सिखाई नहीं गई हैं, बहुत सारी चीजें हम भूल गए हैं, बहुत सारी चीजें हम सीखना नहीं चाहते. In other words, we have to think about what it is to live for and to live with the earth, other species, each other. We have to imagine and reimagine life. And we have to ask ourselves what life means to us in its most capacious and generous form. I want to pause here with last paragraph, with both words in that phrase, imagining and life. Both of those words are key for our project. Imagining life is a project that insists on life, on the right to the life, but not just our lives, not our individual lives, to the life of the earth, of the species, of rivers and seas, of ourselves, of all of us, regardless of the usual divisions. And we must insist also on the conditions for the imagination to thrive. I have worked in American universities for more than 20 years. I'm actually understating it. I've worked for 30 years as a graduate student as well. And I've taught now for 30. I started teaching as a graduate student. I've been teaching for 30 years. And it is the imagination itself in America and in the West as well, but especially in America, that it is under attack. That should tell us something. When people think that something is worth attacking, we need to ask ourselves what its worth is. Here in Karachi, where despite extraordinary challenges, people find extraordinary solutions, even in the midst of despair. सड़क पे जाके आप देखें क्या हो रहा है. बिजली नहीं है, किसी ने कहीं से तार निकाल के कुछ कर लिया. मैं मतलब उन लोगों की बात कर रही हूँ जिनके पास जो 2 लाख रुपए का बिजली का बिल नहीं दे सकते. Here in Karachi, where despite extraordinary challenges, people find extraordinary solutions even in the midst of despair. And I'm not talking about the elites. We have the impetus for the revival, for the possibilities of thought, of the imagination. This is why I've joined forces with CAC, and I'm very honored and grateful that they have let me do so, because it has shown me that there are many spaces for thought, learning, and the imagination here in this wonderfully crazy city, which I have never stopped loving. An invitation is an invitation. Our initiative is an invitation for all of us to engage in that enterprise of contributing to thinking differently, to think beyond catastrophe and reimagine what it is to live when disaster surrounds you and threatens to overwhelm. Please join us. Thank you.